Hi, this is Phoenix, and I'm going to talk about my up-and-coming book slash autofiction, The Street Kid. I'm going to talk about specifically animals and Phoenix's relationship to animals in The Street Kid, and explore kind of the themes and where that logically leads us. So it's interesting because Phoenix is a character that is surrounded by animals. Many of his friends take on kind of an animal an animal kind of existence, anthropomorphic animals, and it's really cool how that kind of manifests. So Phoenix himself is a firebird, or more broadly, a bird. But Phoenix also has other friends. So there's of course Blitz. Blitz is a horse. And then there is the Snake Angel, who is of course symbolic and representative of a snake. Then there is the Wolf Kid, who is representative of a wolf. And then there's the Lion Cub, who's representative of a lion. And so the question you might be wondering is, what is the relationship between all of these animals to Phoenix? And I think that is an interesting question to ask, and an interesting question to try to explore. I think the short answer is essentially that basically these animal friends that Phoenix has, they're anthropomorphic animals, but they're representative of kind of the tension that Phoenix himself seems to face. And I would say that perhaps me, Phoenix myself, seems to face, because of course it's an autofiction, so there's autobiographical truths tucked inside. But the difficulty is the tension between trying to trust our primal and animal instincts, and the tension between that as well as our more human and civilized, but kind of suppressed inclinations and existence. And so in that sense, I think there's a lot of tension. Phoenix himself doesn't embody the Phoenix as much as, at least in certain parts, as much as like his other friends. So the Snake Angel is definitely very representative of a snake. The way that I describe his pitchfork tongue constantly flicking out of his mouth, the way that I describe Blitz and his quickness, his way of fleeting, and as well as the Wolf Kid and his bulk, his wolf bulk, and the like. And these characters are definitely very animalistic in many ways. But Phoenix himself doesn't necessarily embody the Phoenix in the same way. Part of this could be because one interpretation of the Street Kid is that these animal friends are really imaginary friends, and so they don't actually exist, and so they embody the more animalistic traits in many ways, because it can exist in Phoenix's imagination, while Phoenix himself just embodies the life, or the appearance of a street kid. But it's interesting because my interpretation of the Street Kid kind of leads me to believe that the Street Kid himself embodies the Phoenix. And so this can be, so when we think of a Phoenix or a Firebird, we think of intense heat. And so this is embodied by Phoenix's passion. So Phoenix's passion represents that heat. For instance, Phoenix's intensity is represented by that heat and that fire. But then there's also Phoenix's appearance, Phoenix's embodiment as a street kid. And so that would represent the unkempt hair, the dirty face, the ragged clothes, all of which is representative of a kind of wildness, a kind of primal instinct. And all of this is, of course, meant to be beautiful in a various way, in a certain way, in a specific way. And it's interesting how Phoenix becomes the embodiment of the street kid, and of the Phoenix by becoming the street kid and by being the street kid. And that link is very inextricable, and very complicated, and very interconnected. And that's something to keep in mind. So Um, Essentially, what does all of this mean in terms of the street kid itself? Or what does this have to do with me? Or what does this have to do in general? And I think that's a good question. Um, for me personally, I'm fascinated by animals. I'm fascinated by what they kind of represent. And yet I'm also fascinated by what a kind of anthropomorphic animal can represent. You know, so Blitz is a werehorse. So he becomes a horse, a skittish horse, um, with every full moon, which is pretty cool. And so there's essentially really no cut and dry answer, just that essentially the animals represent a kind of hope for Phoenix. Um, Phoenix constantly longs. Phoenix constantly longs to be with his friends, which is hard because they're, in one interpretation of the street kid, they're imaginary, and so his friends essentially aren't even there. But he's longing to be with them, and so because Phoenix kind of embodies this animalistic and primal instinct and this animalistic appearance uh, via and by way of his street kid self and appearance, um, he is essentially an outcast. He's an outcast in the more traditional interpretation of just the very fact that he's a street kid, that he has no place to call home, that he's alienated from society. But there's also kind of a more internal doubt about Phoenix's character, and this desire to fit in. And so essentially, by Phoenix understanding that he is more animal rather than human, um, it helps, at least in certain aspects, it helps to solidify his relationship with his friends, such as Blitz and the lion cub. And, you know, as a side note, I've always been struck by the tension of, or just the idea of Phoenix being around animal friends who are trying really hard to be human, but essentially are more animal. And I think that represents kind of my own understanding of my own primal instincts, that I think are very complex because they're inextricably bound up with my mental illness and how my mental illness operates. And and so, like I said, the biggest takeaway would be when Phoenix, with Phoenix being a firebird, with Phoenix being a phoenix, even if this is only embodied as his street kid self, at least in certain aspects, he becomes closer to home by being around his animal friends and by accepting that his imaginary friends, according to one interpretation, are animals too, and they get Phoenix's struggle. They get Phoenix's struggle to let go of his more civilized self, to be his beautifully firebird self, to be free of the constraints that constrain the human self. My book's going to be released soon, so keep an eye out on it. It'll be released on Amazon, and I hope that this talk has kind of primed you for reading the book, and I hope that you enjoyed this talk about the street kid, this literary analysis. Again, this is Phoenix, and thank you.